I'm going to show you how to connect to and program a Wago 750-841 PLC and update its firmware if necessary. So first, if you just want to program it, you're going to need a couple of softwares. We need Wago Ethernet settings and CoDeSys version 2.3.9 or higher. If you're in the SCADA lab, then they should be on the S drive under the Wago folder. If not, I will have a link for both softwares in the description. All you need to do is request them and they should send them to you via email, but I was unable to get CoDeSys through this way. They're trying to move people off of CoDeSys version 2.3 and onto 3.5, so I had to call into Wago and they sent me over the files. But once you have those installed, then you can turn on your processor. If you don't already have it wired up, just wire it up the way you see on the screen and that should be enough to get you started. You are also going to need a Wago cable to serial and a serial to USB-A adapter, assuming of course you have a laptop from the Century that doesn't have a serial port on board, in which case you're not going to need the adapter. You can find the port for the Wago cable in this little hatch on the processor. And now with the processor on and the cable plugged in, you can go ahead and open up Wago Ethernet settings. With Wago Ethernet settings open, we're going to go top right, settings, communication. Make sure our serial ports is selected. And to figure out which COM port we're using, we're going to go to Device Manager. You can see we're using COM port 7. So make sure COM port 7 is selected under ports, whichever port you're using. And when you click Apply, it should pull up all of our settings. You can see here under firmware that my version is 21. If you have anything less than 21, then I would recommend upgrading it. Skip to this time to learn how to upgrade your firmware. It should take no more than 10 minutes. Now under TCP IP, this is where you would change your IP address and your subnet to anything you would want. Now mind you, after you do that, you are going to have to initiate a write. If the I/O LED on the front of your Wago PLC is flashing, that's an error code. You can learn the specific error code in the documentation for the PLC. For me, it was a problem with the Wago's clock. Simply applying my computer's system time to the Wago PLC fixed that issue. But I would recommend doing that while we're here because it's just so simple. Now, if you're trying to connect to this PLC over the internet, then we can test the connection by swapping out the communications to Ethernet. Same method as serial, settings, communications, make sure Ethernet's selected. You can change your IP. Now if you didn't know the IP of your device, you could search for it like this and it will find different Wago devices on the network. But we already know our IP. Apply, and it should pull up the same page but over Ethernet this time and everything should be good to go. Now you can open up CoDeSys. To create a new program, File, New Program. For a device type, we're going to want Wago 750-841 firmware version 12 and up. Keep the defaults. Select your language of choice. I prefer ladder. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it first program. Probably make sure there's no space in there. And here's your design view. But first we need to do some more configuration. So go Resources, open PLC Configuration, Hardware. We're going to want to edit our K bus. Now some Wago devices allow you to scan for all of the attached modules, but we're going to need to add them manually. Now you can go in here and you can add them one at a time for every single attached module you have, or you can just go and search for your modules by number, which is what I'm going to do. Now once you have all those, you should see them here on the side, and each one of the modules makes their own addresses, but we can come here and create aliases for them, which is going to make programming easier. I'm going to call these digital inputs. I'm going to name these digital outputs. And I could do the same thing for our analog cards, but I'm not going to be using those. And same here, you can see them all, and you can see the aliases we have for them as well. And that's that for PLC configuration. Now we need to go to online, communication parameters, create a new parameter. Again, you can call this whatever you want, but you're going to want the Ethernet TCP IP. I'm going to just keep mine as comms. The only thing we're going to need to change is we're going to want to change our local host to our IP address. Once you have that finished, make sure you click off and that it's saved. Select OK. And then we can create our program. Nothing fancy, just something simple, an input and an output. This isn't a programming tutorial. And you can see here that if we didn't create aliases, it would want us to create a tag here, which would be fine, but we're just going to use the aliases we have. Once you have your program, go to online, log in, and if it works, great, but if you get an error about it missing a POU, then you can do the following. Go to task configuration, insert task. The name doesn't matter here, but I'm just going to call it program call. The only thing we need to change is the type to freewheeling. And then we want to append a program call and just add the only program we have. And that should resolve that error. And with that, we should be able to log in, download our program, and then we still need to put it into run mode. But after that, should be able to reach over here and yep. And that's our program. I hope this helped. Now, as I said, if your firmware version is less than version 21, then I would recommend upgrading it. And to do that, you are going to need one more piece of software. Again, if you're in the SCADA lab, then it should be in the FW21 file. Now that name might have changed, but if you're not, I also had to call into Wago to get the firmware file, but they should be able to get you what you need. The file should come with a PDF of instructions, and in the instructions there should be a link to download the FBC update utility, which we are going to need, so go ahead and install that. Now we are going to need to do the firmware update over serial as the configuration gets wiped during the upgrade, so go ahead and plug in your serial cable from earlier. With that, go ahead and open up the FBC update utility, select identify, and it should pull up the PLC that you're plugged into over serial. And you can see here that the firmware version we are loading is version 21, and the current version on the device is 15. So go ahead and click update. And two things to keep in mind: make sure that the serial cable stays plugged in during this time, and both your computer and the PLC maintain power throughout the entire process. But with that done, this process should only take about 5 minutes to complete. And once it does finish, you are going to need to reconfigure its IP and maybe even its time. But then you should see version 21 right here.